Alright, finally caught up. Phew. Really took much longer than it should have. But alright, so what's the movie everyone's talking about?
We live in a society.
We live in a society.
We live in a society. We live in a society.
We live in a society.
We live in a society.
I'm Jucker.
Alright. I'll talk about the fucking clown movie. Jesus. I've never seen a discussion on a film be this toxic or sporadic. The amount of insanity that went on within a few months exclusively about this one film is staggering. I mean, I think everyone expected this film to be at least a little controversial when they first heard about it. The Joker's just one of those characters that seems to just make people become insufferable.
Wanna know how I got these scars? Well, I'm the Joker, baby!
I mean, months before a trailer had even been released, people were already making jokes on Twitter just about the set photos. I think we all knew something was coming, but I doubt anyone saw it becoming this crazy. It started out with fears that it might deal with the rising incel community, and from there, it just went off the deep end. Alt-writers started pointing out the skin color of the love interest. News media rode the controversy train of mass shootings and tried to imply there might be one at screenings of the film, and then got upset when there wasn't one. It seemed to imply that it just was around the corner. Any second, Todd Phillips made some incredibly ignorant statements on political correctness that Mark Maron, a cast member of the film itself and a comedian, vehemently disagreed with. Scorsese came out and said he didn't care for comic book movies despite Joker itself being inspired by and often compared to his career. People argued whether the film was pro or anti-workers' rights. And by the end of all of this, I was just wondering whether this was all just one long aristocrat's joke.
Kid is convulsing, starts throwing up. You don't know whether to shit or puke in this room. That's how... What the fuck am I doing?
Surely this couldn't be real, right? This had to be orchestrated or faked. This can't be reality. I'm not sure there's been a film as controversial and yet insanely popular as Joker since Passion of the Christ, which is a weird comparison to make. Jesus to Joker, our two messiahs. Praise be. And yet, despite all that, I actually was extremely curious because I actually liked the Joker as a character. The Dark Knight was my introduction to cinema. Killing Joke is one of the few comics I've ever read in full. I have an investment in this character, and in that, I at least wanted to know how Todd Phillips decided to approach him. And in all honesty, I think I could say that I think the film was pretty good. Insanely flawed, but more hit than miss for sure. Let's start with the obvious. Joaquin Phoenix is absolutely phenomenal in this. Granted, it's rare that Joaquin Phoenix isn't phenomenal, but I'd argue this is up there with his performances in The Master and Her as one of his best to date. He manages to truly embody the Joker as a character physically, both in the slouched misery that the character lives in for the majority of the film, and the sly manic energy that he's able to exhibit in his few free moments. His suffering feels authentic, and even his movements feel perfectly in line with the character. He contorts his body to represent how the Joker feels with a natural-looking, awkward movements when he's upset, and a more fluid freeness when that weight of stress is lifted from him, like a sort of physical, almost weightlessness he has. Hell, he even walks with a wide stance to show how he's used to running in clown shoes. It's insane attention to detail. Directing here is mostly solid too. Todd Phillips has never really impressed me too much with his directing style. I mean, his mainstream comedies were sadly really flat, and Wild Dogs, while an improvement, still didn't really grab me or impress me much. And yet here, he puts on a surprisingly good clinic on how to frame a villainous character. The Joker is often framed in wide, steady shots with lots of space face to emphasize his feelings early on in the film of being lost and scared in a big city, with sort of steady close-ups and more freeing moments. The lighting is intense and dark, with emphasis on reds and greens, not only because they're the colors of the Joker, but also because they're representative of the sickening feeling the city gives him in the green, and the blood he's able to spill later on in the red. There's not really much I can pick at here. I was pretty impressed with the directing job. I think it looks really good visually. I mean, sure, I could do with a little less handheld. I think that he kind of overdoes it a bit, and I think that sometimes it was a lot less effective than a more steady shot, but honestly, besides that, Todd really stepped it up here. Gotta say I'm impressed. But did you remember that phrase I used earlier? More hits than misses? Yeah. Nothing is more hit and miss here than the script. A big issue I have is the fact that, despite the film trying to take a swing at the pain of having mental illness, the film kind of falls into a sad amount of cliches on the subject. For example, they seem to use a lot of delusions and hallucinations for storylines here, and it's really unnecessary. I get that the Joker is supposed to be really crazy, but the Joker is a special kind of crazy, one that has found his solution to his life to be to make the world as hard and scary for everyone else as it was to him, to embrace the chaos and make it everyone's reality. And delusions and hallucinations and visions that aren't really there aren't really a part of it, and they don't really add to the situation that the film's about the alienation of those in the lower class who are suffering the most. And it doesn't even really add much emotional weight to the story either. It just feels like a cheap cop-out to go, oh whoops, what you thought was happening wasn't. It's just an easy to lean on cliche for mental illness, and I really wish they had done a better job with it. Not to mention, there's a lot of weird jokes about the handicapped in this film. There's a few overheard at the comedy club, and there's a surprising amount of reoccurring jokes at the expense of a character with dwarfism. At first, these jokes seem to be just to paint one character as unempathetic and rude, but then the film takes it onto itself to make its own without him, just sort of saying as if, ha, the world laughs at the dwarf too. Todd, maybe it's in really bad taste for you to make jokes targeting a group of people often mistreated by society in your film about a man often mistreated by society. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. But the jokes aren't the only issue. The second half in particular grinds to a screeching halt with an absolutely unnecessary subplot. I get as a film you need its conclusion to push the character forward. When the implication of those scenes and the characters in them are just dropped before it even reaches that necessary end, I think most of it can go. It feels like this section was just written just to pad the runtime and feature some characters from the lore, and it's just really forced. It luckily does end with one of the best scenes of the film, and that is the scene that's necessary to continue on the arc of the character, but it really struggles getting there. The whole thing just feels tacked on, and just a real wasted opportunity to develop the character more. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss the politics of the Joker in this film. It's certainly been a hot button issue for a lot of people. This is by far the most conflicting element of the film for me myself, because in a lot of ways, this film is taking a stand on the cruelty of wealth inequality and the dehumanization of the poor, two really important issues to me. I mean, there's literally an anti-rich protest outside of a glitzy gala screening of Modern Times. Yeah, that Modern Times! The one about the cruelty of capitalism being watched by a bunch of rich assholes not listening to the working class outside. It's not exactly subtle what the film is trying to say there, but when it comes to escalations of the demonstrations with the police, the film seems to get very queasy about saying anything positive or negative from there. It becomes painfully ambivalent to the morality of the riots, for example. Which sure, the Joker himself is ambivalent to the results of the riots as a character himself. He's just there for the chaos at that point. But it still seems like a weak move for the film itself to suddenly abandon even pondering how to approach this issue. It's one thing to say being poor and not seen sucks, but I wish it actually tried to get into the morality of how people often act from there. It just feels sadly like they just didn't want to face the consequences of bringing up the idea that maybe change is needed. It's just so sadly underdeveloped in terms of interrogating its its ideas. And yet, it's not like the script is without its strong points. Both of the dance scenes are absolutely fantastic. The ending is absolutely beautiful. It's just chock full of memorable moments that just reverberate in my head for days. It may falter at times trying to reach its end goal, but when this film hits, it hits like a fucking truck. I gotta respect that. Fittingly though, this film is sort of an enigma to me. It manages to both be a mess at some points and a gut punch at others. It's a film with ambition, but it doesn't always stick the landing of that ambition. But in the end, the pros definitely outweigh the cons for me. Even with its flaws, I can't help but admire all the parts I enjoyed, and there's certainly a great deal of those. What can I say but bring in the clowns? Todd Phillips' Joker gets a 7 out of 10.